Now we'll move to question 3.
Canada plays a significant role in the mining around the world. Nevertheless, because of mining practices in countries with weak standards of protection, many of the poorest people in the world are exposed to hazardous waste and environmental pollution. What measures would your government take to ensure that Canada's mining companies act responsibly abroad, since the lives of so many people are endangered and the environment is placed at risk?
Answering first is Tony of the Liberal Party.
Thank you. Canadian companies must hold themselves to the appropriate standards when they're conducting businesses outside of the world, and they must meet the standards that we expect of ourselves. In the past 4 years, our government has made this a priority, and to ensure that we are holding corporations account for their actions, we've appointed the Canada and the world's first ever ombudsperson for responsible enterprise. The ombudsperson has a strong mandate to review alleged human rights abuses, make recommendations, monitor progress against companies, and act and rule against those that do not cooperate in good faith. So we've led the way in setting a new standard for promoting responsible business conduct globally, and I will continue to support that activity.
Thank you, Tony. And answering next is Yvonne of the NDP.
So I would agree with Tony. We need to hold corporations accountable. I haven't seen a lot of evidence of that in the last, well, as long as I've been alive, which is a little longer than I would like to talk about. But I think if we're going to set standards and get corporations to abide by those, it can't just be in terms of mineral extraction in other countries. I agree this is where the hardest impacts and the worst consequences of any of those activities are being felt by poor and very vulnerable people in all parts of the world. But we need to make our corporations stand accountable for many more things as well. And I think Jagmeet Singh is the one leader who has said, I will stand up to big businesses, to corporations. If we just ask them to pay their fair share of taxes and then turn away when they say we prefer not to, how are they going to take us seriously if we're going to implement or set standards for them to keep in foreign countries? So we won't invest, we won't give subsidies, we won't do anything to support the efforts of these companies, and we will make them accountable, but we will also stand strong on many issues so that they know they have to take us seriously.
Thank you, Yvonne. And now Andrew of the People's Party of Canada. Andrew?
So Canadian companies, when they're operating abroad, should be operating with the same standards that they're expected to perform here in Canada. I would support any legislation that would make this a law that we can take action against such companies, and the People's Party of Canada will be respecting the independence of the judicial process and never be putting any undue pressure on the prosecution of a corporation. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. And Walter of the Green Party.
Canada has mining operations, energy, design, manufacturing, construction, banking around the world and developing nations. As has been said, we have responsibilities and we have to hold companies accountable. We have to provide research and education focused on the quality of life. We need to provide financial security to avoid another 2008 financial crisis. We need sustainable operations, things like replanting, control of tailings and mine waste, making cleanup mandatory, providing fertilizing standards, and promoting no-till and regenerative farming. We need to make sure that they're providing a living wage. We need to make sure that they're providing benefits to all the workers, including part-time workers, and eliminate this classification of independent operators. We need ethical practices, no more bribing. Thank you.
Thank you, Walter. And that's the end of the 3 prepared questions, and now we're moving to the audience questions. And I'm counting on everything having run smoothly, and I'm just going to ask Fran to ask the first audience question.
With children. With children making up 25% of Canada's population, but reflect 100% of Canada's future. Okay, let me start that again, sorry. With children making up 25% of Canada's population, but reflect 100% of Canada's future, and suicide being the second leading cause of death for children in Canada. What is your plan for putting children first, and what supports for mental health will you make sure are put in place?
Answering first is Andrew of CPC.
Okay, so when it comes to mental health issues, this is a provincial issue. The People's Party is taking steps to ensure that the provinces are no longer going to have their hands tied when it comes to providing health care to the people. Ending corporate welfare is going to take a lot of the pollution out of our economy that is just being subsidized year after year. So letting the free market regulate itself will allow us to have a much better future for all of our children. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Going next is Walter of the Green Party.
The Green Party plans to allocate $10 billion to post-secondary and trade schools, free tuition to colleges and universities, cancellation of student debt, that portion that's held by the federal government, and elimination of Canada's student loans program in study income assessment. In addition, with respect to healthcare, we want to provide a farmer care program, restore the health accord, and we need to replace the current formula based on GDP with a formula based on need. Thanks. I think that answered your question.
Thank you, Walter. And we'll have Yvonne from the NDP next.
So, healthcare, it's a good one. We have stalled in terms of our federal responsibility to the provinces in terms of all healthcare funding, and our party has identified mental health as a particularly important issue, not just for children but for everyone. But let's talk about children right now. Let's talk about Indigenous children in the north, where the suicide rates are probably 10 times the rate that we're experiencing in other parts of Canada. So we need to improve funding. People who have mental health challenges can't afford to wait 6 months on a waiting list, and so that's just another way that we punitively punish people who are already suffering with mental health concerns. Poverty is another thing that we need to address, because a lot of our mental health issues come as a result of people living in constant stress. So we see that as a natural outcome of poverty, so we need to explore, as Walter said, also the basic income. We know that this is something that can actually lift a lot of folks out of poverty. Cancellation of student debt, a lot of those things have put young people under an incredible amount of strife and stress. So we know young people in post-secondary who are dealing with the idea that they don't know what the world's going to hold and how they're going to pay their debt. So that's another piece. And the farm care program is probably the main strategy that we have to address all of those issues in terms of the cost of medication. A third of people don't have any way to afford the medications that they need, but it's a comprehensive approach that we need to take.
Thank you, Yvonne. And finally, Tony of the Liberal Party.
Thank you. One of the best ways to take care of our children is to make sure that families have the ability to afford to raise their children. And the Canada Child Benefit Program has been implemented by the Liberal Party and will be enhanced again this year. In addition to that, we have created, as I've said, over 1 million jobs. And people who have jobs and have the ability to make sure that their family is looked after create a better environment for their children to learn and to grow. We've lifted over 900,000 people out of poverty, and I think that's an important step forward. And a lot of the child care benefit payments have enabled children to be more active in the community and to be able to pursue things that they wouldn't otherwise be able to pursue. I think that healthcare is an important part of that, and there needs to be new ways of approaching healthcare so that it's more effective.
Thank you, Tony. And we'll go to the second question from the audience.
What is your party's position on electoral reform?
And starting off the answers is Walter of the Green Party.
Well, of course, you know that the Liberal Party promised that this election would be, or the last election would be the last time, the first past the post. That promise was broken with no apologies or explanation. The current system allows a party that wins 35 to 40% of the vote to have 100% of the power. That doesn't seem right to me. I don't know if other people believe the same way, but it's just wrong. So we would introduce a proportional representation back into the system.
Thank you, Walter. And now Andrew of the PPC.
So election reform was a platform promise that was made by the current government last election. It was discussed, and the consensus seemed to be to keep the system the way it was, that we just aren't finding a system that would be better than what we currently have. The People's Party has no intention of revisiting this subject. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Now to Yvonne of the NDP.
So I think this is one of our top issues. I tell people all the time that the first broken promise of Justin Trudeau, when he promised that this would be the last election, 2015 was the last election without proportional representation or electoral reform, that was just too much to take. If we were sitting here today and we had proportional representation as our voter system, you could count on people in this region, for example, not just the riding, being represented by people on the stage who have very different ways of thinking about the world. And so as it is, the rich and powerful and those who want to keep their place in this world in terms of being in power don't like the idea of an electoral reform system. And I go a little deeper than that because I feel like everybody at the door that I meet who's been through this back and forth, Liberals, Conservatives, for the entirety of their lifetime say, what's the point? Why should I vote? So when you think about the system and how it produces similar results all the time, it's actually an active mechanism of voter suppression. If we want people to be civically engaged, we have to know that people can be rest assured if they vote their conscience, if they vote what they think is best, that they will have some representation in a riding like ours or in a region like ours, that you would have some Green representatives, you have some NDP representatives, even if your riding was to go blue or red. So I think it's an active form of voter suppression, that's my opinion, and we will fight to make sure that we restore electoral reform.
Thank you, Yvonne. And now to Tony of the Liberal Party.
Thank you. This is an issue that a number of people felt very strongly about, and I was disappointed that the promise on electoral reform was broken. And I'm personally in favor of a ranked ballot process, and I understand the Prime Minister's position, indicating that there could not have been consensus, but I would not be opposed to advocating back to the party that we put this issue back on the table. It's something that's important to people of this community. It's something that should be reconsidered.
Thank you, Tony. And